Do you find yourself sometimes asking this question? Are consonant clusters simply too complex for this kiddo? Is this not an appropriate treatment target for this kiddo? If you do, this episode is for you. We are going to unpack that. This is a comment that I get from people all over the world about consonant clusters. Should I work on consonant clusters? This child has severe childhood apraxia of speech. Should I work on consonant clusters? This child has a severe speech delay. This child has autism. So I get this question from speech pathologists all over the world. I want to unpack it with you today. This episode today is going to come out from an email I received just yesterday from a speech pathologist in the Boston area. I love Boston. I had so much fun there. I got to be trained from Edith Strand, the Edith Strand, this summer, and I love Cambridge at Northeastern University. So that was a huge honor for me, and I learned so much from the master herself. So today I'm going to give a shout out to Boston and the speech pathologist in Boston that asked me if consonant clusters were too complex for a child with severe childhood apraxia of speech who she was working with. So let's dive into that. Before we do, there's three very common myths that I hear often, and they are not evidence-based. The first common myth is that before you can work on clusters, such as an SW blend, the child must master the sounds as singletons. The child must master the S in itself, and the child must master the W in itself. And before they are able to do that, you can't put them together. Now, this is a myth. Now, what I've found is actually because of co-articulation, because of the influence of neighboring sounds, I prefer to work on clusters with these very, very challenging sounds. So if I have a child that has the frontal lisp, th for a s sound, the th, let's say for those of you who are listening on a podcast, for the s sound, what I like to do is I like to work on the SKR. So why is that? Because I know that the KR is going to take that tongue back. So what we have is something known as regressive, where you're going backwards assimilation. The kra is going to pull the tongue back for that S sound. So the child is going to be very hard for the child to go the kra in producing the SKR blend. So for that reason, I love to use clusters. They actually help with the production of very challenging sounds. So that is a total myth. The child does not need to be able to produce each of the sounds as singleton sounds prior to putting them together. You can let go of that. The second myth, myth number 2, is that clusters are later developing sounds. So typically when we develop speech all around the world, children first develop vowels, then they develop what's known as the stop consonants, in which you stop the airflow. Then they develop the fricative consonants, the friction airflow, such as fa, va, sa, za. And then after that, they tend to develop the more difficult affricate clusters, which are kind of 50% of each of the sounds. So they're not true clusters affricates. So for instance, if you think of the chew, such as chew train, you have ta and sha. But what happens is you don't release the airflow on the ta until you do it with the sha. So you only produce half of the t, sh, and you blend it with that sh sound, the second sound. So when you produce an affricate, which comes before clusters in development, it's really not a cluster because you're only producing half of the T. You're holding that aspiration and you're releasing it with the sh. So you're not going t sh when you make the ch sound. You're holding it ch, sh and releasing it with the sh. So then you have the affricate, which is let's say, a proto-cluster. It's not a cluster because you're not producing both of the sounds completely. And then after that, normally we produce the cluster sounds. And this is all over the world, 2-element clusters, and then we have the 3-element clusters. You have the challenging liquids up there, the L and R sound there on the top as well. That's how normal development goes. So many people are saying, whoa, 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 consonant clusters, that's after affricates. This child can't even produce any fricative sounds. I can't be working on those clusters yet. Now, this is very faulty reasoning, and this is really going to negatively impact your gain. Let me explain why. Speech does not develop like a geyser. So if you go to Yellowstone, you're going to see the geysers, Old Faithful. You're going to see the water coming up from the ground. So you work on an earlier developing sound, such as the fricative F, F, instead of a cluster, you're only going to improve that F sound. If you work on the cluster way up here, do the hard things first, then you're going to get a waterfall effect in which you get the F sound for free. You're working on SKR or a 2-element cluster, and look at that, that F spontaneously develops. Does it take time? It does take time. F is a complex sound. It's not easy. So what we're going to have is you're going to have those earlier developing sounds develop first. When you're working on a complex cluster, this is very important to understand. You do not change the order in which speech develops. That is quite innate. It's universal around the world, this order of development. Simpler sounds develop before later sounds. What happens is you speed the process up. So we do not want to work on the early developing sounds first, because speech does not develop like a geyser. That does not impact the later developing sounds. It's like if you're lifting a 100-pound dumbbell, and the 100-pound dumbbell is the 3-element cluster, then you're able to lift a 50 and a 25 and a 10 and a 5. If you lift the 5-pound dumbbell, you cannot do the 10, 15, 25, 50, 100. It does not work like a geyser. It works like a waterfall. So if you understand that, you are going to get greater gains, because what happens is you're going to be treating untreated sounds, and they're going to develop spontaneously because your treatment target is higher. You're going to have, as Judith Garrett would say, system-wide linguistic change occur in the brain. Challenge creates change. The higher the treatment target, the greater the change. So it is a myth that you need to work on the earlier developing sounds before you can go to the clusters, and you should put the clusters there on a top shelf and come to them at a later time. Now, the third way too common myth when it comes to clusters is that if the child is deleting consonants, for instance, I had a child this year who had initial and final consonant deletion in their words. What did I work on? I worked on clusters. Why did I work on clusters? Because of the waterfall effect. What was the very first phonological process that the child suppressed? Initial consonant deletion. We still have final consonant deletion in some, but not all words. We have them in any of the fricatives, we have them in any of the affricate sounds, we have them in any of the liquids, and we have them in the glides because the child has apraxia of speech. The glides are difficult because glides require really quick retraction, protraction of the mouth. Hence the word glide. You're gliding those lips back, you're gliding those lips forward as you produce the sound wa or ya. So that can be very challenging for children with childhood apraxia of speech. But on the earlier developing stop sounds, does the child produce the final consonant? Yes, ma'am. Yes, they do. And this happened not because I was working on initial consonant and not because I was working on final consonant, because I wasn't. It's because I was working on clusters. And there was that waterfall effect in which the first phonological process, which was the consonant deletion, spontaneously suppressed. Sure, he's not able to produce yet those later developing sounds. It typically will follow that trajectory of easier sounds will come in first, more complex sounds will come in later. It doesn't matter if you're working on SKR. That's not going to spontaneously develop. It's going to create optimal change for the child, but that is the hardest cluster. It typically develops at the age of 7 years. We're working on it in therapy because we're creating system-wide change with a level of cueing at preschool age. Okay, so that is the third myth, is that you need to work on those consonant deletions before you work on clusters. You're going to get the consonant deletion naturally. There's only been one time in my career, I've been doing this for perhaps over 15 years now. I've been choosing the complex clusters in which the child did not naturally suppress final consonant deletion. And the reason for that is that this child had this difficulty with cognitive flexibility. And they had this rule that you delete the ends of words. So they could produce the R, they could produce all of the most difficult sounds in the language, but their rule was you take off the ends of words. It was a cognitive flexibility rule. The child would also delete the three. So if the child was counting 350, it would be 352, 354. So every three, when they counted, they would delete. So it was kind of an obsessive kind of rule they had in which they would delete the ends of words. It had more to do with social emotional flexibility than it had to do with speech clarity. At least that was my hypothesis at the time. So it did not naturally develop. That only happened with one child who I've worked with in over 15 years. Let's look at what are we going to do instead. First of all, we have our toolbox. I have my toolbox. It's right here. I have every single cue that I've learned in over the past 20 years of working with children with speech sound disorders. In many of my best cues, I did not develop myself. I did not learn them at a continuing education training. I learned them from parents, or I've learned them from graduate students who I'm like, oh, that's better than mine. I'm taking that and I've stolen them for them. So I have a bazillion cues in this box in which I say, what do you do if it's not enough for the child to simply hear it and then say it, which is the case and why they're with you. If they could just hear it and say it, they don't need speech therapy. So this is why we're here. All of you that are listening to me have your own toolbox. And I know some of you, your toolboxes are garage level toolbox. You have so many tools of the trade that you've gathered over the years. It's impressive. And some of you who may have just graduated have a little mini toolbox that you can fit in your purse. We all have our toolboxes. What you're going to do is you are going to get your toolbox out, and you are going to care very, 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 very little of what the child can do on their own. So you get that, the test, the CAP, the GIFTA, the Arizona, whatever it is you're giving, you give them that speech test, and then you say, okay, this is what they can do. Now, am I going to base my treatment targets off that? No, I'm going to base my treatment targets and how complex they can go on what can they do when I give them every single tool in my toolbox. That is what I care about. So we're not asking, can the child produce clusters? Never, ever ask, can the child produce clusters? Ask, how? How can this child produce clusters? And that's where your toolbox enters the picture. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about first why clusters are so important. Now, clusters are very different than singleton sounds in that when you produce a cluster, two sounds together, you're coordinating two consonant movements without a pause in the center. I always think you're going 0 to 100. So what that does is you are doing speech. You're co-articulating two sounds. And when you're doing that, you're improving motor coordination. There's two things that are happening here. You're maintaining the airflow. For instance, I like to start with, which is very, very powerful, the SW blend. I'm going to show you on YouTube how I cue the SW blend. Please have patience with me. I'm only going to cue SW. I'll say the word swap. Okay, like swap it to me. Ready? So first I'll do the S sound. So I will go S, and I might say, let me hear that snake sound. Let me hear the snake sound. I might do it on the arms with a touch cue. So I'm going to put my thumb and my finger together, if you can see me on YouTube. And the reason I like to do this is something called entrainment. Your mouth does what your hands do. If you ever see children at the preschool age cutting, they're moving their scissors open and close, they're opening and closing their mouths as they do it, or they're drawing, and you see their tongue go around as they draw a circle with their fingers. So we're going to capitalize on this entrainment. And when I want them to keep the teeth together, and I'll pull it away and make a nice long snake sound. As you can see, I'm going 0 miles an hour. I'm using every cue I have in my toolbox. I'm going and having the child speak with me in echoed, slow speech. The child's saying the exact same thing I'm doing. If the child's using their hands and fingers, great. If they're not, I'm giving them every cue I have. Notice how I say the W. I'm not just going wah. I'm getting their position into the lips by going swoo, and then I'm slowly gliding the lips back. Wah. Okay? Because the W is complex. You have a wah. You're gliding the lips from a protruded to a retracted position as you say the sound. It's gliding. Okay. So I like the SW blends. And the reason I like the SW blends, and the reason they're so powerful and they're my go-to, is they're known as maximally distinct. So this is where the Cirque du Soleil occurs in the mouth. Cirque du Soleil means it's very different on one side. I always think of this acrobatic swing, and they're coming to one side of the mouth and they're going to do something different on the other side, and they're right next to each other. So at the S, you have your lips retracted. You're doing a friction sound. When you're going to that W, your lips are protruding. Woo. So your lips are going in the opposite direction. They're retracted, they're going to protrusion. Woo. And instead of having friction in the airflow is just gliding over the tongue. This is really acrobatics in the mouth. You got the lips retracted going to protrusion. You have the S at the bumpy ridge of the alveolar ridge up there, letting just a little airflow out all around the alveolar ridge. And then you're going to go and let the airflow flow. We're changing the manner, we're changing the placement dramatically. This is 0 to 100 miles an hour. This is challenge. This is where you are creating challenge in terms of motor planning. What? I gotta take my lips and move them from the back and move them all the way to the front. Oh my goodness, I have to take my tongue and I have to lower the tongue and let the air flow out. We got a lot going on in the next sound here. We're not just moving to a vowel, we are moving from 0 to 100. And in terms of planning, in the sense of we're doing friction airflow, and then we're moving from friction airflow to released gliding airflow, a vowel-like airflow, which is flowing, the airflow flowing of the tongue instead of being frictive. This is motor programming. We've got, when I think of motor planning, I think of where I'm going to put my articulators. And when I think of motor programming, I'm thinking of the activation of how we're going to move it, actually. So we are really challenging this in the motor planning and the motor programming. With childhood apraxia of speech, well, I don't see clusters in the program. They're all multisyllabic words. I want you to MIA. I want you to take messy and perfect action because you're not going to have a protocol to look at and to follow. And I want you to go for the simplest blend, I think the simplest and most effective, the SW blend. And something as simple, just swap it to me, please. You're going into swap it to me, please. You'll see it. It's in my book. You're going to see it in my membership. That's going to be the treatment targets you get when you join. And that is where I start with many children with severe childhood apraxia of speech. And that's how I can maximize my gains. The third thing that we're going to think about is we're going to think about this improving the motor planning and the programming. The fourth thing we're going to think about is we're improving the verbal working memory here, because the child has to remember not one sound, but two sounds together, the SW. So many children with language delays, language impairments, they have verbal working challenges. For that reason, you're going to see them delete syllables and delete consonants more than the other children with speech sound disorders. So it's one of those things that I look at and I say, I see a lot of deletions on this articulation assessment. Because of that, at the preschool level, I really want to look at the child's language. This is likely more than just speech because of a poor verbal working memory. The child is not remembering these two consonants. They're only remembering one of the consonants. Maybe it's happening at a cognitive linguistic level instead of at a speech motor coordination level. The same thing I'm seeing with multisyllabic words. They're not remembering all three syllables. They're only remembering one syllable and repeating it. So you always have to keep that in mind. But the neat thing about working on clusters is we get two for the price of one. Not only are we improving the speech motor coordination through Cirque du Soleil, it's hard for you and it's hard for the child, but the potential is amazing. And what can happen when you do that? When you believe in yourself and you believe in the children you work with. So let's go on and talk about how we're going to do this again. We have, what I use is the dynamic tactile temporal cueing. So I use what Edith Strand developed for childhood apraxia of speech. I use that with every single child I work with who has an articulation impairment. And what that means is I use a most prompting to least prompting hierarchy, and I provide the level of cues where the child's at challenge point. Challenge point is 80% accuracy. If the child is below 80% accurate, then we're having poor habits that are developing, errors in the motor planning and programming. If the child is below 80%, they're getting frustrated. If they're above 80%, it's too easy. I need to pull away some cues. If they're 90%, 100%, this is too easy for them. I need to back off on the cueing. Now, the level of cueing I provided is dynamic. Dynamic means it's moment to moment. Maybe I'm starting one of my SIS activities, which are a ton of fun, but I'm getting it to the 8th round of the activity. And the motivation is like, we've done this 7 times before, and now I'm saying the paragraph for the 8th time. I'm going to kind of rush through it. What I need to do is at that 8th time, I need to still make sure they're 80%. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to up the cueing level, realizing that the motivation level, the attention level is lower. So I need to ensure that we're not having errored motor speech programming, errored motor speech planning going on because of that. So it's always moment to moment. It's like a dance. And sometimes they're all in. And for this turn, you were 0% cued. Now, one thing that I think is extremely important is to cue the verbal cue as quickly as you can to fade it. Fade the verbal cue as quickly as you can and fade it as often as you can. Because when you are talking, you are doing the motor planning and motor programming for the child, and the child is passively along for the ride. The way that you are able to fade the verbal cue is that you're using the same treatment targets. For instance, in my SIS membership, I have the sentence level treatment target, the complex sentence level treatment target, and the paragraph level treatment target. With those treatment targets that I have, some children are at the sentence level, some are at the paragraph, and some are at the complex level. Because I'm using that same treatment target over and over again, I'm able to stop talking. And the child's able to focus on not what they're saying, but how they're saying it. They're able to focus on, okay, am I keeping my teeth together? Do I showing my hungry dog teeth for the R sound? Is my tongue in the back of my mouth? Do I have a big smile for the S, for a lisped S? All right, so all of these things that we're focusing on, they're focusing on the how. They're focusing on that. They're not focusing on what they're saying. And what happens when you have just that same treatment target that you're doing over and over again within a highly engaging activity, such as the SIS activities are, what you have is you have a child that is then able to be the teacher. And you're able to stop talking. And you're able to say, you said that all by yourself. And I was the student. I was listening to you. You are the teacher now. And they'll even tell you the rules. What did you do? You kept, and they say teeth together, and they'll tell you exactly what they did. I saw your hungry dog teeth. So they will tell you the rules. And why is that? Because they're not saying 20 different S blends. Okay? They're only saying One, over and over again at an 80% criterion. And so we're building that motor planning, we're building that motor programming, we're building that accuracy, and they're also focusing on how they're speaking, the process, instead of what they're saying. Okay. So that is what we're going to do. That's what the speech therapy looks like. So if you work at the paragraph level, I'm just going to be honest with you, it's more challenging. It's not for every child. Some children are at complex sentence, some might even be at the sentence level. And I even have one child who has a sensitive temperament, who's a reluctant speaker. I only have that child saying 1 to 3 word phrase. I'm considering the whole child. It has to be individualized. And this child is being very brave because this child bringing out that one word to participate is a big deal. That's giving 100% and putting it all on the table, meeting them where they are. But those are the options that you have in individualizing for each child. What I do is I keep that target the same because I want them to focus not on what they're saying, but on how they're saying it. So that is how you do it. This is how you do clusters. You give everything in your toolbox, empty it all out, and you pull the tools back, you put them back in the toolbox, keeping an 80% criterion. But at any moment, you might have to dump the whole toolbox out again because children get sick, children get tired, things happen. Children might have not had a lot of sleep. And for that, then you're going to just have to say, we don't want any bad habits to develop. We're going to be carrying a little bit more of the load with the cues. That is how I want to end it today. I'm going to say that clusters are going to feel messy for you if you have not been using them with children with severe speech impairment, if you haven't been using them with children with autism, if you haven't been using the clusters with children who have childhood apraxia of speech, you are going to be going where no one has gone before. This is where you do messy, perfect action. You open the gate and you give them everything you've got. And you might be surprised when they give you everything that they've got and the kind of gains these children can make. I want you to do what you do best, which is to roll up your sleeves and make the world a better place.